First thing, any adjustments to the agenda?
I do have an adjustment. I would like to add a discussion related to open meetings.
Okay. Do you want to do that now?
I don't, wherever you would like to put it. You can
Let's
do it
get
now or
into
you
it.
can do later. Okay. So I wanted to clarify that because of open meetings, when we have to avoid having any kind of a discussion that's not available to the general public when we do notes or emails between the committee. So emails between the committee members where everybody's involved should really be related to scheduling the meeting or participation in the meeting, but not any discussion of the subjects to be discussed. So if you want to make a comment on items that we get ahead of time, those comments should really just go to the staff and to the chair and not copy all.
So
Because it
that's
looks
not
like a
my,
discussion.
that's not my understanding of the open meeting law. So my understanding of the open meeting law is that you can't have a conversation, which means it can't go in two directions, but people can make comments that go out to the group. The group just can't respond to those comments.
Yeah, my understanding was
And that's the way Catherine talked about it last time she gave a little class too.
okay. So she said it didn't make sense to copy because I had the understanding you shouldn't copy all when you make those
It's
comments.
not good practice to copy all because there is then a better chance that someone will copy all back, right?
Right.
But it's okay. So for example, as long as we're not responding to one another, I think it's okay for us to make comments about a topic that then would get discussed in the meeting.
Okay, so that's where I'd like to have some clarification with Catherine because I thought it was that we were even being discouraged from doing that. And
I also think that is my understanding as well. Though I am not an expert, and so I will refer to Catherine. I'll ask Catherine, but I would assume if two people make comments, whether or not they're referencing directly back to each other, that would still be considered a conversation about it, right? Because in a meeting, I mean, two people can raise their hand and say something about, a topic, and they don't have to be relating back to each other for it to be a discussion. But this can be, we can rediscuss with Catherine. I can get a little input.
Thanks for the comments, Bob. I think if you say it about 5 more times to me, I'll finally remember.
and I guess I should have the discussion with Catherine. So maybe I'm interpreting it stricter than I need to, but it makes me very nervous when there's any chance of a dialogue that takes place, because that's, if someone from the public came in and said I wasn't part of the discussion, they can then actually petition to get copies of all your emails on your computer to confirm that you didn't have any other discussions. When they do it, when they can ask for a search of all your emails. And that's what makes me very nervous, is like, why would I allow someone to have to come study my computer?
So I will double check with Catherine on that, and she could even come back, and she couldn't attend this meeting, but she can speak to that. Moving on, does that feel covered, Bob, to you?
Yep.
Okay.
I just want to highlight that if you want to make a comment or discussion, my recommendation is send it to the chair and the staff, and they can compile a response if it needs to go out to everybody, or it waits for the meeting.
Okay. Minutes from last meeting, acceptance of them. Do you want me to put them up on the screen? Will that be helpful? Sorry, was that a yes?
I mean, I downloaded them. I'm fine.
Yeah, I'm fine with them.
I'll make a motion to accept the minutes. Unless
Second.
someone wants to review.
I'll second it.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Guy,
Wonderful. Oh, do I have to say?
yeah.
You're supposed to ask if there's any
Opposed?
discussion for, that's okay.
Oh, ugh, sorry, I am not a chair. Okay, discussion / opposed? No, okay, moving on. So the goals and implementation steps chapter, I can put this up. Okay. Okay, did anyone have any notes? So actually I wanted to address, Kirk had brought up a great point, that we are kind of going in a funky order. We don't have LEAP data yet, to do the data part first. So the way that we kind of landed on it, was that we are going to tackle the things that we feel like we have enough information to do. And that includes goals and implementation steps, because regardless of how the LEAP data and LEAP modeling comes back, we know these things, like the fact that we want to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, the fact that we want to increase renewables, the fact that we want to reduce vehicle miles traveled. All those things, exist kind of outside of the specifics of the data. And so we can do our goals, and we know also the steps that will make those things happen. And so we felt comfortable putting that all together. And, the one thing that's kind of notable in that vein is that I left all of the old goal data like this. So whole vehicle miles traveled per capita to 2011 levels, reduce it by 20%, those things. I left them all in to hear your opinion on whether or not we want to continue specifics of percentages and numbers, or if we want to do what we did with the energy chapter, which was to kind of remove all of that and speak about it more in terms of trends and general kind of goals. So those will obviously be updated with the LEAP data, which will be available before this plan is finished. But so for right now, we're doing all of these things without LEAP data, knowing that we do have the information about, what we need to do as a region. So that's kind of the thing to preface it with.
So thank you, Marlena, and I read the plan, these goals again as I was flying from Hawaii to California, and I really did have concerns with how specific some of the things were without understanding the data that supports those specifics. And we can go into more detail as we go through the individual ones. And so I sent a quick note out to a few people on the fact that I did have a concern that we were having goals and specific implementation without having reviewed the data that supports those goals and implementation first. I did, on my next flight, go back and review a lot of the information we've looked at and recognize that, we are almost purposeful doing things out of order, as was the plan, because we don't have the data. The data's later than we anticipated when we set out our plan on how we were going to do this. And so I think we all expected we were going to be seeing the data as we were developing these goals and reviewing the goals. But I think that as long as the goals, we go into this recognizing that we're setting goals based on the data that we're anticipating, and we may have to change the goals if the data that comes in doesn't match what we anticipated, right? And you know, one of the areas as we go through this, and I think we need to talk about how this is organized, because to me, there's a lot of very prescriptive stuff for the municipalities that I don't understand the cost benefit analysis. The communities, our small communities, don't have the staff or the tax resources to do many of these things. Unless they're a lot less expensive to do than I think. And so I'm concerned that we're being this prescriptive without having a lot of data that says the cost benefit is there, and doing those things will achieve the goals.
Understood. Do you want to, I mean, we can dive into specifics if that's where we want to start.
Can we start with the first sentence under NRPC?
Yep.
What are regional partners?
So I think it's other utilities and groups doing things like that. I think the reason this was pulled from the old one, and I believe the reason is because GMP is the only one doing the like smart, what do they call it? Basically the things that help you reduce your electric use. They have like their smart rate, I think is what it's called. So that's why GMP was kind of pulled out of that.
Well, I just have two issues, because since the entire Grand Isle County is served by Vermont Electric Co-op, whether or not that should be in, and I get a little upset with the use of acronyms right off the bat without explaining who they are. I mean, there's Green Mountain Power, most of us know, but that's because we've lived here for a long time. I'm assuming EVT means Efficiency Vermont. But I will go down a little bit further. Where did I just see this? And I am totally ignorant of CVEs and RBESs. So if we're going to use acronyms, then the first time around, we need to use the entire word.
You are completely right. This is something we've also been discussing in staff, because we'll all use acronyms. You're completely correct. So those will be fully written out.
Okay. And I think if you looked at Vermont Electric Co-op carefully, that they're doing a lot of energy efficiency stuff with their customers.
I think that's a great point, and we can change that wording to be broader along the lines of utilities. So, especially because as this plan will be in place for a while, you know, I'm sure what programs are offered by which utilities will change. So we can change that wording to utilities, generally.
So before we dive too deep into this, Marlena, can you just give us your thoughts on why this is organized this way? And when it says municipal and then 1, 2, 3, 4, I mean, are we gonna slap the municipalities on the wrist if they don't do 1, 2, 3, 4? Is it a suggested list of actions? It's not clear to me what this is.
Yes, absolutely. So the thought around this was, if you kind of look at the old way this chapter was written, it had, you know, overarching goals, and then it would do some implementation and action steps with a lot of context. And it was this really kind of hulking chapter where everything was kind of buried. And, you know, when I first started, I had kind of proposed the idea of like, we need a list that can be pulled out of the plan, that can be easily accessed by people, municipalities, or staff, saying, okay, we want to, you know, work on energy efficiency or renewable energy or greening our processes, whatever. What can we do? And we need a much simpler way for people to access that. And so the idea was to kind of shift this chapter away from all of this context heavy process and just really pull out goals and then the steps that can be used to achieve them. So these are not by any means necessary to-dos. And, there can be a paragraph of context added at the beginning, really stressing that these are simply ideas and options for municipalities and individuals looking for options. And the fact that not all options will make sense for all municipalities or individuals. And so these are simply, things to consider. And, the idea is also for, as you all look at it, to, add the things that might jump out at you as like, hey, this is another way that can be completed, or this is another thing that, would help achieve that. So this is to really start those conversations. And you'll notice like later on, there's some that don't have individual options. Some of these goals don't really make sense for, individuals to try and be targeted, or even some municipalities. But the idea is just to really split it out, because a lot of our old implementation steps were really, really vague and used a lot of the language of like support this happening and things that were really out of our control. And so we wanted to kind of narrow it down to things that we could do, our municipalities could do, or our individuals could do.
Okay, I'm still struggling. So my view, we look back 5 years, 2 years, 1 year from now, if we didn't do 1, 2, 3, and 4 for NRPC, we failed, or they shouldn't be our implementation, right? But for municipalities, then it becomes a whole, I mean, we can control what NRPC does and what we're committing to do. So I'm just struggling with this format for me. I mean, I think that if you sent this to, without a lot of context, to the select boards in all of our towns, they'd go off the deep end on where the hell they think we're going to get all the staff and resources to do all of this stuff.
Well, I agree with Marlena that having a paragraph in the beginning saying that, these are as much aspirational as anything else, that as I understand it, there isn't significant context or sanctions for not meeting these goals. But I also think that the context in the beginning also ought to explain how these are to be used relative to the energy goals in the regional plan, by saying that these are essentially more specific, as I understand it, in general terms, and also to have, as a matter of context, what I think is the case is that this energy plan is in place because if it meets certain substantive requirements of the Department of Public Service or others, it will be entitled to special weight in certain types of permitting proceedings.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, I think that's it. But if we aren't doing this with our goal of actually having results, then aren't we wasting time?
So
I mean, we've got to put, if we're going to have goals in implementation, at least at our level, we've got to have things that if we don't do it, we failed, right?
I'd be careful on that. I mean,
Well,
almost all the state goals in the energy field over the last 20 years, I'll make a sweeping statement, have been very optimistic. And there's always been backpedaling and circumstances change. So it's hard to know
Agreed.
exactly whether a goal is realistic or not.
but our goals can be,
I-
right? This demand side management is a goal, and we can have specific things we're gonna do to help ensure that happens.
So, and I think that is where your input comes in. Like, if there are ones that you don't think are realistic, or there are other ones that you think are necessary to be added in, that is the consideration we're looking for from the
But I
committee.
mean, at the end of the day, this document should guide whoever our energy planner is on what they work on each day. Right?
Bill, you've had your hand up. Would you like to say something?
Yeah. First of all, I feel lost. I feel like I don't understand the process. I don't know where we are in the process. And I feel like we're looking at content that, absent any framework, doesn't really tell me enough about the overall approach that the energy plan is meant to have. And that's somewhat akin to what Kirk is describing with a lack of data. I don't know why we should do any of these things without seeing certain facts about energy in our region. And I'm also a bit concerned that everything here is related to things that are costs to municipalities, individuals, and maybe NRPC, when there's not really any money coming to support this. A lot of this stuff they call demand side management is nibbling at the very edges of energy demand. Like, here's some different kind of light bulbs to use that most people are forced to change to anyway. I take advantage of everything Efficiency Vermont sends my way that is economical for me, and I get hardly anything out of it, and a lot of them are listed here. And the things that really would make a difference cost too much for me, and I can't get a grant because I make too much money, and I can't get a tax incentive that works because the tax system is built to give everybody a standard deduction that doesn't allow for you to actually qualify for any itemized deductions. It's all, I think, in some ways, language that doesn't really get to the heart of the matter. And I think it's actually expressed very appropriately in the very first two lines, item number 1. Use demand side management in an era of doubling electric energy demand. That's an oxymoron. We're saying, because you want more electric, we're going to have to ask you to use less electric, or use it some other. We really are not giving people something to hang their hat on in a lot of these cases, that I think is what our purpose is.
So the only thing that I would kind of point to is the fact that a lot of those things are outside of our control, like who qualifies for incentives, issues.
Well, maybe that's the
tax code.
purpose of the Regional Planning Commission, is to point this out. You know, we don't have county government. This Regional Planning Commission is the representation of that. The municipalities as individuals generally don't have a lot of power, because the smallest ones hardly have any say when they go up against those that are larger and have greater power from population or wealth. And so it's got to be this Regional Planning Commission that says things that are substantial, like the energy companies need to do more to bring the cost of renewable energy down to levels that the middle class can afford without incentives that they don't qualify for. And I understand that that's not something that the region controls, the state does. But what we have to stand up for is what the people in our region need. And what the people in our region need is not more electric stuff that causes the cost of living to go up so that people can't live here and leave. We need to come up with growth in supply, better distribution of supply, and we need to make it so that the prices are as affordable as they possibly can for the average people who cannot make changes in their lives quite easily. Like the idea of trying to use some sort of smart meter technology to understand that it's cheaper for me to do laundry at 2 a.m. Well, of course it is, but I work during the day. I have to do my laundry at a certain time of the day. These are almost dreamer kind of things. They're not, and in some cases, realistic unless you've got data that says we can actually do that. Do we have enough people in this region who can make a difference with these kinds of things? Again, first thing I'd like to see is what is the overall plan that we're looking to develop? Do you have like a table of contents for it? Two, do we have to make decisions about objectives without data? Why don't we wait for that data? Is there a reason that we've got to get this done within a certain time frame without data? Why don't we just wait for that? It's going to go into the regional plan later anyway. It's not going to go into the regional plan when it's published. I feel like we're putting the work in front of the products that are needed to build.
So this was a discussion with staff. I think the issue is if we wait to start completely until we get the data, we're going to be significantly behind when we're supposed to adopt this. And I think there was also an understanding that the data we're going to be given is not going to change these overarching things, like knowing that not to mention a lot of these goals are driven by the Act 174 requirements. So these goals aren't fully just developed by NRPC staff and by what we see as our highest priorities or our highest needs. They are part of the requirements. And I don't necessarily know that what data we're going to receive is going to change these goals. And I think I would, again, I implore you, if you do have suggestions for implementation steps that you would like to see added or taken away because you feel they are necessary for our region. I mean, if you go back and look at our old version of this chapter, the goals and implementation steps, a lot of the steps do focus on what you're saying, Bill, of encouraging those bigger steps. And while there is a role for that, as Kirk was saying, this is to, really lay out what work we're going to be doing. And that isn't work I'm doing as the energy planner, because there isn't really a venue to do that. Like those bigger things, we do the encouraging of incentives and voicing all of that does happen, but it's really not a goal that's able to be worked on in a regional sense. And so again, if that is, if we do have these goals, like advocate for whatever, we can absolutely add that if that's something that you're all feeling is like a benefit to the plan. But
I think it'd be a pretty cool exercise just to try to say, okay, for each one of these, let's take municipal, because we're really representing municipalities as the Regional Planning Commission. Let's look at the first page, the municipal demand side management things. Just pull one of those out, replace public streetlights with high efficiency shielded LED options. What are the costs of doing that, and what are the benefits of doing that?
Right, what's the cost benefit analysis?
Right. And then can a municipality actually do that? Or do they have to raise taxes to do that? Then consider backup battery systems that can provide power during outages and backup. So how much does that cost? Is it really likely to do the job that people need? Or are they better off having a diesel generator out there that they turn on once every 2 years because the school lost power, because Green Mountain Power doesn't often lose power. It's the small ones like Vermont Electric Co-op that lose power for weeks on end. I think we should have the staff actually take each one of these and say, this is why we think that this is a net benefit to recommend, as opposed to let's make these lofty goals and then they just exist there without really not only proof that they're appropriate goals by showing that there is a net benefit, but that would seem like it would give them the next step, which is we've determined it's a net benefit because the costs are these, and so we can ask municipalities, ask the regional, and ask the individual to look at those investments as prudent, because in the end, there will be a payback. I feel
so-
like all of the energy demands that are made of us in Vermont are pricing. That's the demand side management that happens here in Vermont, is that the price keeps going up. So the only way that you can afford to eat is to not pay for electricity, and you live cold in the wintertime. And you pay for other kinds of energy that's not good for the environment because it's cheaper than electricity.
So the problem with the cost benefit analysis is it's different in every situation. So those aren't things that we can do for every municipality, every building, every individual. That it differs widely. And I think that's part of that disclaimer of saying, you know, these are to be assessed per building, per situation. And that is the same thing of like, you know, all of these are things that have been recognized at the state level, or like the thing of replacing public streetlights. There's a massive effort to do that. Most of our towns actually have. It's a very common program. Efficiency Vermont works with it. So it's like that, us doing the cost benefit analysis.
I'm not asking for it to be done for every municipality, but if there was an example for that could be put in there, that would be useful. Or if Efficiency Vermont has done it for 10 municipalities, what was the cost of doing so, and what is the time frame where they're paid off, and what was the, you know, the net benefit overall? I understand that not everything is easy, but I also I'm trying to make this realistic as opposed to just I don't know. I'm frustrated. I'll be honest with you. I live in an old farmhouse. It's a beautiful place, and it's killing me to keep it warm in the winter. And I've investigated every kind of energy that I could use in place of what I use now, which is not the best form of energy for our environment. And they all take so much investment that I'd have to be wealthy beyond my means, which I think are pretty good compared to the average citizen in this state. And it makes me feel like if I'm this frustrated, how do the people who are less well off feel about it? And how do they feel about it when they read our plan?
Well, I gotta say, a lot of the measures are fairly standard, like LEDs, heat pumps that have been measured on a consistent basis by Efficiency Vermont, by the Department of Public Service, and not taking into account, unique situations, but in general are appropriate to be done. They're cost effective over the appropriate lifetime, and that's what these studies do. Now, some of them do require upfront capital that might be difficult for some people to make, but I think a lot of them are here because they do represent the type of measures that have been found to be appropriate and efficient and cost effective over time.
Well, I'm not 100% sure of that. You mentioned heat pumps. I've been told by multiple contractors that as cold as it gets where I live, I shouldn't put them in. They don't work for 20 days of the year.
So
I'm
sorry,
just saying.
I want to steer us back to the conversation because
I don't think about it either, but I do really feel like I'm a little bit lost here looking at a collection of goals and objectives without a plan. Maybe that's the start of the plan. I'm not sure, but I'll stop talking.
I don't know who it was that mentioned that it feels more like a wish list. Because I'm down another road of reduce annual regional fuel needs. Some of this doesn't seem to fit, at least in my county, and marginally, maybe one or two municipalities in Franklin County. But biomass district heating, and particularly in areas with large institutions. I think Northwest Regional Hospital is about the biggest institution we have in the 2 counties. And just little things like number 11, go back up. Where was it? Support the creation of a loan program to fund the construction of tiny homes throughout the region. You aren't going to have tiny homes, not because of lack of funding, but the fact that zoning bylaws are all going to have to be radically changed before they're even an option. I think a lot of this oversimplifies the problem, and a lot of it just, to me, honestly, it sounds kind of like boilerplate that would fit in sometimes Chittenden County a whole lot better than it would Franklin and Grand Isle counties. This just doesn't give me anywhere to go, and I think maybe that's what Bill is saying. Reading through it,
go ahead, Barclay.
I don't see where it gets us started towards solving the problems.
Okay, I'm very curious to hear the steps you would like added. The thing of the loan program for tiny homes was actually something we're working on specifically because personally I looked at building a tiny home, and the thing I ran into was not zoning issues, it was funding. No traditional mortgage program will fund a tiny home. What beyond, so we're actually looking at like grant programs to create a revolving loan fund. But that's one specific thing. I think I need more specifics around what are the things that you aren't seeing or liking, because again, we're balancing here, like wanting it to be realistic and relevant to the region, but also needing it to fit these state requirements. And I'm just, to reduce annual regional fuel needs and fuel bills, like what are the things that I think I'm missing where, you know, what are the things that we're not touching on? I mean, modernization
Marlena,
assistance.
one, you're getting to the nub of it, which is that you're trying to make a plan that will comply with the requirements that the department imposes in order for the plan to have special consideration regulatory proceedings. Maybe we should be looking at what those requirements are and make a determination whether or not we think it's worthwhile to have a plan that meets those requirements, or whether we think it's too onerous because of circumstances in our region or for other reasons.
I mean, yeah, if that's where the conversation wants to go, I think we would be the only region not complying. Do you want me to pull up the requirements? Do we want to dive into that?
Well, I do think it would be helpful, because you're seeing some resistance here, irrespective of what's happening in other regions. And in addition, you know, I think another part of the problem is, you said that we need to get this plan done by a certain deadline, but we're not going to have the data until a certain time. And that's another way in which we're getting squeezed by folks other than ourselves. So and you know, we're pretty much generalists here. You've been swimming around in this stuff, so it's really hard for us to react, you know, to such a detailed document without at least having a better understanding of what the landscape is.
Okay, so I have heard a couple times, I think an outline of a full plan would be helpful, of what the full plan will look like, which realistically, like the table of contents will look relatively similar to the last one. It's really more like, you know, trimming and changing the content.
Yeah, I think a second ask beyond, you know, what's the framework within which this is going to fit is, what is the timetable? I've heard about it. I really need to understand more clearly, what is it that we need to do by when and why is it? I also appreciated why is it that time frame is so critical when this is really important. This is not just, okay, regions, the state made this act, tell us you agree with it by writing a plan that says yes, 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 yes. When in reality, maybe what we should be doing is, as Peter suggests, we look at what the state has recommended for its constituents. We look at it to try to represent our constituents in these two specific counties and say, we like these ideas. We think we can do this. Let's make recommendations to our region for that. We don't think we can do that in our region. And we actually think the legislature ought to look at other ways that we might be able to encourage this, or try to put the weight of that on more densely populated areas, or whatever might be more appropriate. A boilerplate, I don't think works. And if we're different than all the other regions, actually, I wouldn't mind that. I feel like counties are different, regions are different. I find it hard to believe that the regions of the Northeast Kingdom are going to be able to agree to a lot of these same sort of suggestions, to agree with the act of our legislature. People there are in much worse conditions than they are here in the northwest part of the state.
Matthew, do you want to make a comment?
Yes, I do. Thank you, everyone. It just, you know, the way I look at it, you know, it's basically we want a brief summary, which, you know, of what we're doing now, what we're going to do in the future, and how can we break this down, like you said, by a survey, by audits, you know, and see how this all come together. I think that's what I'm getting from the group is a summary of what we're doing right here, right now. And that's pretty hard to put into words because every region is different in their energy, climate or energy committee, as they call it. And yes, we may be different than all the others. And I think, the way I look at the whole system is, and this is not to be, out there, but I think, there's too many hands being dipped in the Kool-Aid out of Burlington, Chittenden County, because, everybody's focusing on that, instead of looking at what other regions are doing. And yeah, our elected officials, have their own quorums about what's going on. But we as individuals, within the region, for me, I just want a brief summary of what we're doing now, what we're doing in the future, and how to get there, how to get started, how to get there. And easy to understand language. Reason why it's so complex and nobody wants to continue it because it's too complex. This stuff is, and this is what I've been telling across the state, I don't have a bachelor's degree. I don't have a college degree. But we're gonna force that on individuals that are, that are with us right here in this section right here. It's like this. I don't know this because, like one person here said, it's the ones that able that can do the work, the ones that have the financial means to do that work. But we don't. So it's like we need help on how to guide us in a simple language, but also simple. Make it simple as you can be moving forward, so we can get what you're trying to get at. Thank you.
So this is our schedule. I believe this was reviewed last meeting, but it'll be helpful to look at again. So this is basically how we're going to approach the plan. This month, we're doing action and implementation section, really looking at the overarching things that we're trying to accomplish. So those are our goals, and then the things that NRPC, municipalities, and individuals can do. Next, we're tackling the siting maps and criteria. So that's basically looking at all those maps, looking at how we have different things classified on those maps, making sure we're still happy with that, making the minor adjustments. There's some things like vernal pools. There were things that have been added or adjusted since last time around, since we've done that. That will be our next kind of 2 meetings. Along with in the September meeting, we'll also be looking at the introduction. Then we're going to be looking at the targets. By then we should have that information. And also, like, I think we keep referencing the data and having the data. That data is also very dense and very speculative. I think a lot of those the modeling that honestly I don't know would make the best first kind of foray into this plan, looking at that. So we have that marked out for the September, is it? Sorry. So November supply and consumption. So that's the data of simply what are we using, what are we creating, and how do we need or want to adjust those things. Then targets, and that's really looking at the LEAP modeling. Then feasibility, challenges, and conclusions. And that kind of wraps up the plan. So that is how we're tackling the plan. This was something we laid out as a staff, really like worked through to try and put it together in a way that would make sense, fit our timeline, and fit how we're getting the information.
So just to be clear, it sounds like the data that we're requesting to help us understand why something might make sense and why there could be a net benefit is expected in January 2024 when you have the target/strategy section slated.
So I think that's the clarification I'm looking for. Like, what data are
Well, we've actually have had a pretty good run at looking at information that folks share. This is a pretty smart group of people, I think, that can look at. I think there are, for example, supply. Where are we in supply in our region relative to other regions of the state? Where are we with demand? What are our fuel sources? Are they going up? Are they going down? What are the costs of those fuel sources over the course of time? And how are they relative to perhaps other standards of economic well-being? For example, what fraction of the total gross income or net income of a family, average family, are there? I was astounded reading the regional plan that energy is such a huge element of cost in our lives. We take this chapter, this effort for energy planning, as if it's making a small decision. These are decisions and efforts and direction and guidance that we want to provide municipalities and individuals in those municipalities of huge importance. That the energy costs are oftentimes much more than the housing costs in some places. I just want to make sure we understand all of that. And then I would suggest that we could take these goals that you've given us. We don't want you to have wasted your time, energy, work. This is good, but we might be able to, as individuals, mark this up with some track changes as to what we think about each of them. For example, I can tell you that there was a comment here, some of these look better for Chittenden County. I think that that's probably a true statement for several of these here. I was also I found it remarkable in the reading of the regional plan how 2 municipalities in our region really are the only ones that can do a lot as a municipality because of their population density, their economic engine that they have. Those are St. Albans City and St. Albans Town, and to some degree, maybe Swanton. But the rest of our municipalities are rural and are really almost on their own. And they find everything that comes out is to be another burden on them to try to live when it's already very difficult to live out in the country. And we need to consider some of these as they're good in rural, they're not good in urban areas, etc. And maybe try to frame them so that they're less cookie cutter, more directed towards the appropriate party. But we owe you that work. We can't just complain about this stuff to you. We should give you that feedback. I would suggest that if you what I would recommend to you is that when you give this out a week before, as you did, and that's very good, that you say, I would really like it if you could mark this up with your specific comments when we meet next week at this time. I'm afraid that not everybody's going to be able to do that, but it encourages us to have very specific comments here rather than just generalities. And maybe those specific comments can actually help you advance your effort, because we do want to advance your effort. We don't want to just be complainers here. But I do think if these people that provide data can't get it to us until we're near the end of this process, maybe what we should look at is the old data. Let's look at last energy plans data. I don't know if that much has really changed. And I think we might see some arguments in that old data that suggest that some of these things are too wishful and not practical. And some of these things are good for some communities, some individuals, but not for all. And maybe we can even recognize that. We shouldn't just say, here's a list, try to check them off as you go.
Yeah, so I apologize for not explicitly stating, I do want, specific comments. That's what,
Well, I'm actually
For this
suggesting to
for.
you that we, as your committee or the committee, should take that on our own. We shouldn't ask you to say that. We need to do that. And we didn't in all cases. I think Kirk and Peter did, and I applaud them for that. But all of us need to make sure that we come to the meetings with some sort of concrete work that we can help build this and keep it moving, not just complain about it, which I have.
Yes, Kirk,
So I have a couple of specific comments.
here, do you want me to
Yeah.
switch back to?
So, and I think that we must address the Shiai. And we must take some specific actions. That is something that's very unique in our region. And we must take some very specific actions that address that. So, for example, why would we allow any large scale renewable in that region? I'm just throwing it out there. Why? Why wouldn't we save the little bit that's left for, smaller projects that are more available from an equity standpoint? Right. And
Can I
I
answer that
agree,
quickly?
we can't fix that. We don't own the transmission, but we don't have to allow any more development in there. Right? Let's focus let's use up our farmland in the places that can take the power. I think I think we need to address what is our plan around the transitional cost that we've nibbled around the edges on a little bit here, right? There's clearly going to be a huge transitional cost. Ultimately, maybe we get to a point where the new power is cheaper than the old power, but there's going to be a transition period where it's much more expensive. And how are we going to manage through that as a region? Other than just what specific things are we going to do to help manage through that as a region? And I think it is somewhat unique in our region because of the outlying rural character of much of our region. Also, in some ways, all of the things we're talking about here from a municipal standpoint are in contrast to what we have in our plan around equity, where we already know that based on what we're trying to do from an equity standpoint, most of the money is going to go to very few towns, right? Most of the grant money that's out there is going to go to those towns that were high for cost versus, you know what I mean? So a town like Georgia, where the transportation costs, because transportation is hugely related to energy, Georgia already has been shown that there's not a chance they're going to get any of those grant funds, right? So why would we lump them in with all of the other municipalities in terms of what we want them to do? Why wouldn't our plan be focused on those areas where we can get grant monies to help out in the overall region's use? So I'm just throwing these out here. I don't expect responses now, but I think, and I can try and come up with language, but I don't necessarily have the data to support the language for things like, what are my suggestions on what we would do to address the fact that we don't have the transmission needed? So I don't want to put up any windmills in an area that you have to shut them down. I have to look at them not moving half the time.
So just quickly to address the thing of we only want small, that was a discussion we had, and I believe the answer was we can't just make a blanket statement that we don't want large projects. I don't think we're allowed to make that.
I thought we were allowed to have a map that says where things are appropriate in our region.
Right, where things are appropriate, yeah.
Right, and they're not appropriate in the Shiai.
I mean,
You know?
yeah, that's an option except for the fact that municipalities are required to have, you know, these goals too, whatever that, you know, but I'm saying the idea that like, okay, we don't want large scale because that's going to eat up our headspace. We're not allowed to say that. Second being, there is supposedly
I guess I don't know why we're not allowed to say that. We're trying to conserve, we're trying to conserve our best agricultural and our best soils and best areas for, you know, why would we cover them with energy generation when we can't transmit it out?
I don't,
This,
that's
the
not,
state preempts the regions and the towns on most areas of energy planning, except to the extent that the state has made exceptions. We can't assume that we have unlimited control over what resources are going to be here and how they're going to be used and how much. We're really, all we can do is take what the state gives us in terms of leeway, in terms of energy planning. And it goes back to my more general point, which is that we have an energy portion of the regional plan right now. We've got goals here that are mirror images of the goals in the energy section of the regional plan, except that they're more detailed here. We're spending a ton of time here about that incremental movement from the regional plan. And it seems to me we really need to understand whether it's worthwhile doing that. And that really depends upon what advantages we get if we do a plan that would be recognized by the department as meriting special deference, and what are the requirements that we have to have that plan? Because I suspect from what I hear, we're not going to be willing to meet a lot of those requirements from what I've seen of what the state wants in order to have a plan that will accord deference. So, you know, along with getting whatever additional information we think we need, I think we really have to have an exercise on whether or not this whole exercise is worth it.
so we're reaching, you know, close to end time, and I think I'm going to need a deeper understanding of why this is not working. And like, so I can pull up the requirements next time and we can really dive into what we are required. I mean, again, the requirements are very similar to what they were last time around. They're, you know, minuscule. The differences are the things like around equity. Yeah, that is really the like big thing.
Most of us weren't here last time around.
Including myself.
Yeah. So if you could just as soon as possible get us copies of what the state requirements are, so we can have a little bit of time to review them. I would have loved to have more time to review this, but I mean, this was just a tough week. Thursday morning, I hit the road for 12 hours to drive to Virginia. Monday, I spent 12 hours on the road coming back from Virginia. Yesterday, I did 5 loads of laundry. Normally a week would have been more than enough time, but this week, Kirk, you got to sit on the plane and read it. Couldn't do that because the traffic was heavy. But if you could get us sooner than later a copy of the requirements, because we're speaking from a lack of knowledge here as to what we can and can't change on this. And I have kind of a series of questions. The data we keep hearing about, what specifically is that data? Where is it coming from? And is it coming from the same entity that's setting the deadline for when we have to have this done?
So yeah, yes. It's coming from the state. It's LEAP data, which is basically we input all of this data around square footage of commercial space and commuting miles and type of heating systems and all of this, and they put it into they basically make models of like, okay, if this is what you can look like by 2030, this is what you can look like by 2040. So that's what we're waiting on. We have our current generation data, that's separate. That just barely got finished, but we do have our generation data. But so that looming thing, and this is coming from and going to the Department of Public Service. So
Which
yes,
is a conundrum.
yes.
Yeah, because we're waiting on them for the data, and they're telling us that we have to be done with this at a certain time.
And to be fair, they're not telling us this needs to be done by a certain time. Our old one expires, and therefore we want to have a new one in place. Less so they're, saying it's due, more so ours is not going to be viable anymore. So that's.
Is there a way to extend the old one? I'd rather work on doing something well than just getting it done. Personally, I think our current regional plan, I was just looking at it, and in fact, all of the all the objectives, excuse me, that are in this document you're sharing your screen with right now, come from there. They're all there. They were there in 2017. Almost all of these 1 through 8 and 9 I see on this page, it's on your screen. A lot of them are in that too. That to me is emblematic of what I'm trying to say here. We said it in 2017. Why are we going to say it again now? We should be saying things that are meaningful. And the things that are meaningful are that we want to increase the use of electricity. We don't have a lot of electric supply in our state. We focus a lot on renewables. We have some limitations on what we can do with renewables. And it seems like all we can do is ask the individuals and municipalities to pay more. That's the demand side management. And not that there's actually anything happening to supply. We need the state to turn around, fix the distribution system. It's going to take money, but that's how governments do things. And to make it so that it can work with renewables, so that we can use all of the renewables that we've been voting on as a region to help us to have clean energy supply and electric supply that will then make it less on individuals to have to make sacrifices on demand when they're already, in a lot of cases, giving up a lot of things they would like to do because of the cost of energy already.
So back to something you said earlier, yes, I am looking for specific recommendations on current or additional steps that you would like to see here. Again, the reason that a lot of our goals are the same is because they are required. We have added one on equity, we have added one on adaptation. I am for these, this idea of saying we just want the state to do something different. While I agree and can be added as a step, and if you want to, make that as a recommendation of a step, we also have to have recommendations of things that we can do. So sounds like there was not necessarily time for everyone to make specific recommendations. I am going to need that to move forward. I'm not sure I can act on a lot of what has been said tonight, as far as like actually making, the idea of it being boilerplate, the idea of it, not ringing true. I just don't feel capable of making it not like that. These things, you know, are the prescriptive steps that we are able to and currently are assisting with. They are the things that you have been shown as the ways to reduce our emissions. So I would love some more tangible, real input, and I will send out the Act 174 requirements if you want to kind of compare those two things. I'm also curious, I've heard a couple times the idea that we're rushing through this. I can pull up the schedule again. I'm curious what people would have wanted to start with, if not our goals and implementation steps.
Marlena, I think well, I guess I got a basic question first. Is there elements of the existing plan that don't meet any of the new requirements? Are we missing things with the existing plan?
Yeah. So,
Okay.
so
So
one
it'd be nice-
piece.
it-
Oh, sorry.
I was going to say it'd be nice for us to understand it. I think your statement of having us to try to define goals ahead of time makes sense at this stage. But when we talk about actions to implement those goals, we're not ready. It's almost like you're asking for the two pieces. If you just asked us to talk about the goals, we might have had an easier discussion tonight. And I think the other items on your schedule, everything else in your schedule made sense except for this discussion on this stage. The rest of it in your plan fit very well for the right order to do things.
Oh, okay. And so I guess the other piece being what information do you want to have before we address implementation steps?
Again, what I'd like to
I think
see is the requirements that the state imposes in order for us to have a separate energy plan, and then to compare those requirements against what we have in the energy portion of our existing or draft plan to see whether it's worthwhile going through that extra effort. That seems to be a pretty simple conversation.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
agree
And
with
that,
Peter's recommendation. You know, I'm looking at what's in the draft 2023 regional plan for the energy chapter. And that has the data that we're looking for to help us understand. And again, I think that this is all copied over from 2017. I'm looking at the dates of data and it says up to 2016. And I think it's that way because it was incorporated kind of as a placeholder until we have a revised energy plan that we would either make as an annex to the regional plan or pull out the old energy plan and put in the new. If we had to have an energy plan to comply with something to be shown substantial deference, we could show this current one with new dates on it if we wanted to. It's almost, but we do need to know what Peter suggested. One, what is it that are the requirements of the state? Two, how does that compare to where we are now? And then three, what do we think about the differences between the two? And are they things that we can do? But then I think we need to think about representing our region, not just repeating the language of the state. We'll do our best to represent what the state wants, but I think we have to also push back where the state needs to hear that it's a problem for our municipalities, our individuals, and our regions.
so I am sending right now the Act 174 requirements. So everyone will, let's see. Yep. Okay, I'm gonna insert that right now. so everyone will be able to see what the requirements are. But again, so that is taken care of. Peter, I hear you, absolutely understood why you would want to see the determination standards. As far as what information everyone is looking for before we address the implementation steps, like what would make you feel prepared to look at the implementation steps?
So I don't know if this is actually going to work, but I'm going to make a suggestion anyway. When we worked on the energy plan last time, we met monthly. And there's something about monthly that helps you keep it in front of you more than meeting every 2 months, which is what your schedule has been and which is what was laid out for us tonight in the document you shared with us. You're full-time. Peter said it, we're a bunch of novices here. For us to be able to, at 7 o'clock in the middle of the rest of our lives, it's not planning, pick up where you are is difficult. And so we need, I think, to have more engagement rather than less for us to really get it. I think that this is an ad hoc committee. It's not a standing committee that runs all the time like projects review or executive, etc. We're here to get this done, and then we'll put it in pause and come back to it 5 years from now. But during this time, it needs to be a little bit more of our time brought to it so that it stays closer to our focus than what's currently happening here. So I would suggest that would be a good thing for us to think about. I know it's more time out of everyone's already busy schedules. So I'm just opening up your document here. And I see it. Thankfully, it's only 15 pages. It is very dense. People seem to want to disobey all the rules of readability in this government. They're putting more on a 8x11 paper than has ever been recommended in communications doctrine around the world. But regardless, we can get through it. A lot of it seems like a checklist. Can you put it up for a little bit? Maybe just help people understand what it is.
And again, my first question is where does the existing plan fail against these requirements? Would be something that'd be helpful.
So the major one is the major one is the equity goal, adding and maintaining an equity goal. And then there are just a few smaller things with the mapping that need to change. And obviously the targets through the data need to be updated.
Right. So maybe a little bit of this is maybe we need to consider evolving the existing plan as opposed to revolutionizing a whole new plan.
Correct. And this is not supposed to be a revolutionization of the old plan. I think a big part of the reason this chapter came first is because this chapter is going to be really the only one that's changed in a drastic way. And the reason for that is if you look at the old chapter, it is very context dense. And I think, there is a real desire and a real need for there to be steps easily available for when individuals and municipalities ask the question, okay, then what do we do? And so that was how it was changed kind of in response. And if we, and if you all feel strongly about going back to the original style, that's totally fine. We can do that too. But by no means is this a whole rewrite. This plan will stay very similar to the past plan.
So have you tried to answer any of these questions and make that comparison? Because that's what it seems like in my looking at it. This looks like a lot of grants, in fact, the format. But, you know, looking at page 6, which is where kind of the questions start. It's actually page 5. Does your plan's energy element contain an analysis of resources, needs, scarcities, costs, and problems within the region across all energy sectors? Yes or no? And then you are supposed to put the page paragraph notes. Obviously, this is something that you kind of can only do if you have a plan. So could we do that with our old plan, our 2017 plan? Can we answer questions A through D about the plan's energy element, about current energy use across transportation, heating, electric, about targets for 2025, 35, 50 for thermal efficiency improvements? And there we have gaps would be highlighted where we could focus our attention. And I think that would get us further down the road. That's a very concrete step to getting this collection of advisors to you. We're not staff. To help by looking at it and saying, yeah, that I can understand why that's a gap. It's almost irrelevant here. Or, wow, I didn't realize we had that gap. That sounds important. What can we do to fill that gap? And maybe we don't need to revise the entire energy plan. Maybe we don't even have to wait for the data. But maybe it will point to, yes, we do need data. Can we go and get that data ourselves rather than wait for it? That might be if you, I know you don't have staff that you can bring in to help you, but if you have the time to go through this and make that kind of comparison to our 2017 plan, I think it would be a very useful thing for you to then bring to us as advisors to you, how we can agree with you, yes or no, and also where there's gaps. Do we think that we need to address that gap, or do we think if we do, then how do we address that gap? And then we can insert those relevant pieces of information into the old plan, and we have a new plan.
Yes, so I will fill out this checklist, show where we need to adjust in order to meet these standards. Okay. Yeah.
Marlena, I also think that I understand your concern that you feel that municipalities need more specific concrete guidance, and that a lot of what you have given us is intended to fulfill that, but it comes with baggage that it's really untethered from what we have done before, and we don't know how to analyze it. And you ought to think about whether there's a way to provide that more concrete guidance in a less formal way than through another 5 or 7 or 10-year plan that's got to go through all this review process.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's a discussion worth having. I think, the idea was to make this a plan that actually is usable.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you, Marlena, and what Peter just reaffirmed about what you said. We do want to make this much more actionable for the municipalities. We don't want it just to be platitudes. We really want it to say, if you're one of the small communities, which is mostly what we have here, to hear Kirk talk about Georgia as being kind of on the low end makes me feel, wow, we must be at the really low end here in Bakersfield, and maybe even further out as you go. But it really is useful for us to try to remember our audience and give them help, because this is an area where help is desperately needed. I every month when I pay my electric bill, I feel it's strangling me here, and that's just a part of it. We also have the heat that is a part of the equation too, that we've got to think about, and we all has to be couched in terms of is it being done in the most climate sensitive and environmentally appropriate manner too, because a lot of people are reverting to things that are not that good. I've resigned myself almost to using fossil fuels because I cannot afford to make changes like geothermal, solar, or wind because of the costs to do it. I don't have 30 years to pay off a loan. I don't have 30 years, period. So those are the kinds of things that strike a lot of people in Vermont.
So on that note, if everyone here could take the time to make specific comments and recommendations on the current implementation steps listed, that would be helpful in reassessing this. I will get out the Act 174 checklist filled out as soon as possible. And I think next meeting we should, or I will discuss with Catherine and with staff about meeting every month. There is concern about I will not be able to complete new chapters every month. It's just not feasible to do a new one. And so we can do.
I'm trying to understand the idea of chapters. I thought that this was an energy, I thought it was a part of the overall regional plan. The energy plan that we have now currently is in our regional plan.
No, it's a standalone
No,
plan. It's
standalone.
longer than our energy than our regional plan.
Okay.
You might be looking at the energy chapter, which is
Right. Okay. So now the chapter, okay, so I remember the old regional, the old energy plan. I have to go and find it. That was substantial. Okay, so this is what we're dealing with today, just one chapter. All of those different objectives are not for different chapters?
well, so the chapter is the goals and implementation steps. So it is the goals for the entire plan, but it
Okay, I just want to make sure that, all right. Because I don't want to have that kind of collection of goals for every chapter.
no,
Sounded like that was a pretty comprehensive list of
yeah.
partitions. Okay. Yeah, we should make that do, and we understand your time, energy issues as well. I think we've made clear ours. And we're not trying to be, none of us are really trying to be a problem about it. We really are just trying to figure out how we can do it with limited information, because it really is limited information. All of the people that you have here are used to making decisions with a fair amount of supporting information about it.
So that I will come back to the question I asked earlier. What information would you like to see?
Well, one thing I would suggest is
Wait,
that
one
you
second. One second.
maybe send out to everybody the old energy plan so they could take a look at that, see what we're replacing. That would be a good start. Because
Okay,
it's got
what-
good data in that old energy plan that we're replacing.
What I was asking is, what information would you like to see before looking at these implementation steps again?
That was my answer.
Just
The old energy plan. Yeah. Has anybody else read the old energy plan?
I haven't read it for a long time.
That's the same for me. And I think that that's kind of what's not grounding us. We don't really know where we're going because we don't see it. And if we look at the old one, we could read it. It has a lot of supporting data. We could find out that data is probably not that far off after just 7 years. We could probably then have a better position for us to look at all of the items on your list that you sent us to review tonight.
That's how we did the regional plan, which I just went through, which is to take the old plan, mark it up, and come up with a new plan. It's a lot easier for us because we're much better grounded than dropping in a whole new set of requirements, goals, etc., and trying to make sense of them. If we move incrementally from the old one, I think you may find a lot less resistance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that is the plan moving forward. This one chapter, I had originally done with track changes, and it just looked super weird because so much of it was these huge chunks of context. So it was just these like blacked out sections. But just, so the plan moving forward is always that structure of old chapter and how it's being changed.
Great. If you're going to do this mailing, can I make one personal request? My copy of the draft of the new regional plan is, I believe, in the hands of Catherine. I dropped it off for Bethany a week or two ago.
Okay.
And I gave her the hard copy. And I don't read on computer screen terribly well. So if I could just get another copy of that as well, because as Bill said, he went back and he looked at the energy section of that plan, and some of that information is in there, and it's more or less gone for me for now.
Sorry, so are you saying you are requesting the full regional plan as well as the energy plan?
The draft of the new plan. If you're gonna mail out the old energy plan, can you just stick in the same envelope a copy of
I see.
the new draft
Yep.
of the full regional plan? 'Cause I think there's some things in there that are going to be appropriate to our discussions.
So, and actually I will send the email version, the online version to everyone. But if you would like a paper copy, could you just send me your address? And I will send those out. So that, anyone that wants a paper copy can get one.
You're on mute, Bill.
Marlena, from a schedule standpoint, so it sounds like maybe we should try to have a meeting in June. July and August we may want to discuss, because we do try to keep committee meetings down a little bit in July, but then when we get back into September, let's go into full force. I think that's kind of where Bill was headed from a monthly standpoint. He's scratching his head.
Sorry, let me pull
Bill, you're still on mute. Bill, you're on mute.
Yeah, I was scratching my head for another reason, but remembering August is a month we would like to try to fall back a little bit, but.
So adding in a June meeting, but obviously leaving the August out, and then you're saying going back to September, October, November every month then?
Yes, I think you got it right. That makes sense. And
we may skip December too.
Yeah.
And it'll help us to give you some feedback of a good nature in June, so that you won't be any further behind from our perspective. We'll work on, if we can all of us take a look at the current regional plan, energy plan, and then look through that. It's longer than what's in the regional plan. You can look at what's in the revision of the regional plan. That can help you too. Then look at the document that Marlena sent around for us to work on for the, I'm trying to find it here. It's called the Goals and Implementation Steps. And then Marlena, did you say you would between now and then also work on that checklist from the
Yeah.
final update regional determination standards form fillable?
Yep.
Because I think that would help all of us, is to see where the gaps are. And then we can focus on the gaps.
Mhm.
We'll all get a good place hold on the current plan, use that as a basis going forward. We'll use the monthly meetings, skipping August and December. And then we'll also be prepared to give you concrete changes to the document you sent out for our work tonight.
Okay.
The goals and
Um,
implementation steps.
So just quickly running through the end of the agenda. Comment or staff or
So I have to say this too. We should be doing the votes and any of the running of the agenda through the officers of the committees. So obviously Al is not here, but Peter is the vice chair. So Peter should be doing this. I was, when I joined late, which I apologize for, but I was, I had good reasons for it. But regardless, when I heard that you were trying to act as chair of the meeting, that really threw me off. I just want to make sure that you don't feel like you should be put in that. You should not be put in that position. That's one of our jobs. We should have stepped up to do that. And we should look at having a new chair for this committee in August, and that'll be great. And if any of you are interested in doing that, please let Catherine know as the nominating committee is starting to be formed, and they'll have a ballot for the June and July meetings.
Actually, Bill, is an ad hoc committee. I'm not sure this goes through that process. For example, TAC does not go through.
Huh.
No, this one's kind of in between the two, so we should think about that. I'm not sure which. They can go either way, I guess.
We may,
It's not really like.
yeah, Catherine was talking about putting off appointing somebody because we're so close to the elections, but this committee, we should be able to appoint at any time because it doesn't require it to coincide with the annual election cycle. Okay.
Right.
Okay.
Motion to adjourn.
I move we adjourn.
One. Oh, I was going to thank Marlena for all the work and
Yes,
putting up
thank
with
you,
our
Marlena.
harassment.
It's been a
Yes, we
tough
do
night
that.
for you.
We put you through a torture chamber tonight. I'm sorry that is the case.
sounds good. So sorry, I heard Dan first.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Have a good
Thank you,
night.
Peter.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks all.